How does a field of inquiry decide what its canon is? That is, the knowledge that constitutes the core of the field and what everything else is that falls in the margins or outside of that center. And what are the voices then that are represented within that canon, and which are the voices that are left out? About this and many other fascinating topics is this conversation with Yeidy Rivero in the new episode of El Café Latinx. What is the experience of being a Latinx or Latin American scholar in the field of communication and media studies? What are the main challenges and opportunities that come with our identities? These are the issues that we'll talk about in El Café Latinx, where some of the leading voices in the field will share their professional experiences. Hola, my name is Pablo Boczkowski. I teach at Northwestern University, where I hold the Hamid bin Khalifa Al Thani Chair in Communication. Together with Mora Matassi, doctoral student at Northwestern and executive producer of this podcast, we invite you to discover the journeys of scholars who are at the cutting edge of creating knowledge about Latinx or Latin American communities across the Americas. These are our stories. Esas son nuestras historias. Estas son nuestras historias. Welcome to this episode of El Café Latinx. I'm thrilled to have today Yeidy Rivero, who's professor and chair of the Department of Radio, Television, and Film, and also professor of American Studies, and also faculty affiliate in the Department of Communication Studies, all at the University of Michigan-Ann Arbor. Before that, she was on the faculty at Indiana University and at the University of the Incarnate Word. Yeidy did her BA in Puerto Rico, and her MA and PhD in the States, the MA at SUNY Stony Brook in the theater department, and the PhD at the University of Texas, Austin in the Department of Radio, Television, and Film. She's the author or editor of 3 books, most recently, Broadcast Modernity, Cuban Commercial TV, 1950-1960, which was published by Duke University Press and was declared the winner of the 2016 Society for Cinema and Media Studies Catherine Singer Kovacs Book Award, which is a major signal award in the field. She's authored a number of very influential journal articles and book chapters, and is currently working on an incredibly promising book, tentatively titled The Original Miami Sound Machine: Cuban Exiles, the Cold War, and the Emergence of Miami as a Media Capital. Welcome to El Café Latinx, Yeidy. It's truly a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Pablo, for your invitation. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Yeidy, how did it all begin? That is, how was the start of the journey that led you to become a professor?
So I'm going to tell you something that I think it's not the common journey. I never imagined that I was going to be a professor. Let's begin by that. I was doing theater in New York, Spanish language theater and voiceovers, and I began teaching Spanish in a community college, and I realized that I love to teach. This is after my master's. So I took a break between my master's and my PhD, and I realized when I was, teaching Spanish, okay, I love teaching, but I need a PhD. So my goal was, okay, so I'm going to go and do a PhD and then come back to New York City and teach in one of the CUNY system and then continue my theater career in the Spanish language theater career. That did not happen. I finished my PhD. I tried to go back to New York. There were no jobs. And I said, okay, so I need a job. So I got the Incarnate Word. That was my first job. That year, there were not many jobs available. And I got that job at the end. That was a 4-4 teaching load. I knew that I wanted to get into a research institution. I began to realize, maybe I'm not that bad with this, in this thing. Like, I think life takes you in different paths, and that's what happened to me. So I got some awards. I published something, and I said, okay. So I got the Indiana job, and I always thought, okay, I'm going back to New York. I'm teach there, and then going back to my theater career. Nope. I continue the publication because, it's tenure track. And I think I was very lucky, to tell you the truth. I connected with senior scholars who helped me. Clemencia Rodriguez, one of them. And I thought, okay, so maybe this is going to be my new career. But I can tell you that my theater background has inspired me, like it's fundamental in what I do, what I research, who I contact, etc. So that's how everything began for me, something that I never, some of my colleagues wanted to be professors since they were in kindergarten, not me. I didn't see myself like that, but that's who I am right now. That's who I am, a professor, and I publish essays and books. So,
All right. Not only a professor, very, very successful, a much admired professor, chair of one of the most important departments in the field, in one of the most important universities in the field.
Thank you.
You're welcome, most deserved. Not in New York, though, but still one of the most, a little bit far from New York, smaller town as well. So going back in time, after your master's at SUNY Stony Brook, when you were teaching and decide that you want to go to grad school, how was the journey to UT Austin? Why UT Austin?
So I remember at the time, and I think still today, University of Texas was one of the few universities that had classes devoted to Latin America and Latino media. Okay. That was not common in other universities. And I remember when I was looking at programs, I said, oh my God, this is amazing and they had an amazing library also, Latin American Studies Library. And I thought, okay, so that's another thing. I only applied to UT Austin. I said, this is it. I'm not going anywhere else. And I applied. And let me be clear. The first year they accepted me and I declined. The second year they rejected me. The third year they accepted me again. So because I was debating about doing a PhD when I did my master's. I remember my thesis advisor of my master's degree wanted me to continue in theater. So he wanted, why don't you go to Texas, but to study in the theater department? And I said, no, I do theater. I don't study theater. I don't want to, my passion is to be involved in productions, not to study from the distance. So I prefer to be more distant and study something that is important. So that's why radio, TV, and film at the time had top, still today, but, many of the people who actually define the field. And I like also the fact that they combine cultural studies and social sciences. That's my training. I'm training in both. That's why I can be in communication and media studies. So those, and third, and last and not least important, it's beautiful. I saw the tower. It's like, okay, that reminds me the University of Puerto Rico tower, so I'm going there. Very simple, very simple. And I had amazing classmates. It was an amazing moment, Mary Beltran, Hector Amaya. There were, other people who don't focus on Latino studies. America Rodriguez was a professor there. She retired. So it was a perfect place for me to be in my opinion.
Okay. And why did you decline the offer the first time? Because you wanted to stay in theater in New York, or?
Correct. Because at the time I was doing like the voiceover, so I was making a lot of money. And, I always joke, I don't tell the graduate students, I tell the undergraduates, which of course oh my God, I don't know, like in 1994, I had like my annual income was like 60,000. I know, exactly. And I said, no, I'm not gonna go now. And, of course he was doing different things, the voiceovers, the plays, teaching, so that's why I decided to wait. And I think it was a good move, to tell you the truth. I was more mature. I knew what I wanted. And I knew also that I wanted to finish fast. Some people now extend like many years. I'm like, no, I want to finish and get a job and move on. But that's why I selected UT Austin.
And you said a couple of times that your theater background has shaped your scholarship.
Mhm.
In which ways, if you can share with us, how has that happened and has that evolved over the years?
So I pay attention to actors, directors, producers, and now of course it's more common. But when I was beginning, you had Herman Gray, for example, Julie Dachi, these two scholars who actually began to pay attention to different aspects of television production. But there were not many. And in general, the actors are not actually considered or interviewed for studies. And for me, that was key. And to tell you the truth, my first project was the influence of that first project came from my theater years when I saw that there was a lot of racism, for example, in Puerto Rico in casting, which is across Latin America. You know, the Black people are the maids or indigenous people are the maids. So that's why I studied anti-Black racism, for example, because of that. So that was my theater background because that's what I saw. They are the people who, you know, these are the people, they have helped me get into information in Cuba. Imagine, I am not from Cuba. I've never been to Cuba. And who helped me, you know, there were librarians, but also the actors who I connected from my theater years. So this has helped me throughout the years. Right now, my new project, exactly, actors, the voices, etc. And I think that when you study media, specifically television or radio, I think it's important to analyze not only the text or the production or the business, but also these people who are part of programs, you know, who are the visual, you know, people identify with actors. So I think that's why it has been instrumental in what I do. Even though, like, again, now it's more common, you know, there are theorizations of acting, etc. But at the time, not that much.
Do you think it has influenced other aspects of your scholarly life, teaching or even service, you know, interactions with colleagues in institutional building, things of that
Oh,
nature?
for sure. Acting is theater. Teaching is acting, especially when you are in a humongous lecture hall, which I mentioned to you before that I'm supposed to teach a 200 student like class, huge class. And I said, okay, I'm going to be performing for these kids. And believe me, it helped because you engage. It's a performance. You engage the audience. And I think it has been helpful when I do presentations in person. You know, I interact with people. And of course, in day-to-day interactions with colleagues and as chair when I present myself. I think we are, you know, it has been extremely helpful. And now in video, you know, when Zoom, when we do some, we're planning for the graduation, and I'm going to do a video, and that's going to be the acting. It's always helpful, and not many people in my profession right now know about that background. You know, my theater friends know that I'm a professor, but my professor friends don't know that I used to do theater. That's the way it is. But yeah, it has been influential, and it's my passion. You know. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now you said that you had a wonderful time as a doctoral student at UT Austin. Could you talk a little bit about your years as a junior faculty member, both at the University of Incarnate Word, where you had to teach 8 classes in your first year, and then at Indiana, where you did your subsequent stage as junior faculty. How was that experience for you? Also very far from, you know, Manhattan or Brooklyn or any of the boroughs in New York that you thought you were going to return.
Correct. So my Incarnate Word, let me be clear, it was very difficult to have a 4/4 teaching load. And that's precisely 4/4 teaching load and 7 hours of office hours, 7 per week. That was required. It was very difficult. At the same time, the students were amazing. You know, it was a very diverse student population. I used to teach a qualitative methods class, and even like there you have like people who use, you know, more normally like work, and then they want to do a master's to have a better opportunities. again, very diverse. I have many Mexican and Mexican-American students, African-Americans, and white students. A diversity that I haven't seen, of course, neither at Indiana, didn't see at Indiana or at Michigan, okay? But because I knew, again, when I submitted one article and it was accepted, I said, okay, so maybe I'm not that bad. So I said, okay, so I can keep doing this. And that's why I went on the market immediately, because I knew that if I would have stayed there, it would have been extremely difficult to move to another institution. It was very difficult. I was writing in the evening. Like I used to go, sleep at midnight. I was working every day in order to produce articles and get out. Again, but nothing related to the students. They were wonderful. And again, that was my path. Other people love to teach, so 4-4 is perfectly normal. As I tell my graduate students, Indiana is a research institution, so I remember I was hired, and the first, the chair had a meeting with me. I said, okay, so this is what you need to do. You need to publish 3 to 4 articles and a book. And the book has to be out before you go for promotion. Well, I didn't have a life. I remember it was very, 2 women didn't go for promotion because they knew that they were not going to get promoted. And that impacted me enormously. Me and the other people who came after me. So we worked so hard. And, right now there are some, here in Michigan, they're very conscious about the, assistant professors helping, supporting, etc. Yes, I had a mentor, but this type of support that people have right now, I didn't have it. And many of us didn't have it. So that's how it was. It was positive. I had a very supportive community of scholars. I was the only Latina scholar. I mean, that's not something rare, because as media studies is, it's not that diverse. But my colleagues were respectful and supported what I did. In my second year, I was able to get a fellowship, and that's how I actually finished my book. I had a Ford Foundation fellowship for a year. I came back, had the book, had the contract for the book, and then I actually went out for promotion 1 year earlier, because I said, why waste, why wait in this martyrdom of like, oh my God, will I get tenure when I can actually do it? And then I was promoted to associate professor in 2005. And I stayed there, and then of course came the opportunity for Michigan, which I love this university, and I always had many people who I admire, especially in American culture. I was more connected to the American culture faculty. And I said, okay, let me try it. Why not? And so I moved as an associate professor with tenure to Michigan.
Okay. Now, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you mentioned. You said that there were a couple of colleagues when you were at Indiana, female colleagues who did not go up because they thought or they were told that they were not going to make it. And you also mentioned that you were the only Latina scholar in media studies, which is not rare because the field, say, it doesn't have a lot of Latino scholar, Latinx scholars. So could you elaborate a little bit more on sort of your own experience, right? Of in issues having to do with gender dynamics and racial and ethnic relations, how those have sort of shaped your career?
Definitely. To tell you the truth, I of course you cannot detach gender, race, ethnicity. I can tell you that I have felt more pressure or discrimination for being a woman than being a Latina woman, even though I know that it's interconnected. I can tell you that I never had that experience at Indiana. Michigan at the beginning, I had that experience, very bad experiences. And it shapes, I'm a chair right now, it shapes how I interact with the junior faculty. It shapes the hires that I have done. It shapes the way I provide equity for everyone. It shapes everything. because I don't want the junior faculty members to experience what I experienced when I was, an associate professor. That is something, I don't know, these departments are different. My department used to be a lot of men, but being a man doesn't mean that you are misogynistic. It's a mentality, Right now we have, it's way diverse, and we have male colleagues who are very open to that racial diversity and gender diversity. So that's, it was very difficult. It was very, very difficult. And I do everything possible that what I experienced, no one else experiences.
Okay. So do you think that overall the field has progressed positively in both of these dimensions?
I think in terms of gender, more than ethnic diversity, for sure. I don't think, again, we know, all the Latino scholars know each other. We're not many, I know that there is a new generation, and some of them, that have been my students, and some others are at Texas, others, Northwestern. I think it's happening little by little, and I think there is a conscious effort by universities to diversify. So I think, yes, it's happening little by little, but it will take a little, just some more time. In terms of gender, I think there is more diversity in different departments. The key is to have both gender and ethnic diversity at higher levels. That's the key, because that's how change happens. If you have all the junior faculty, women or ethnically diverse, but are junior faculty, they're muted, they cannot say anything. But the key is to, like in my department, I see that there will be a drastic transformation in 8 years when these people are going off for promotion to associate. But I wish there was more diversity at the full professor's level and in administration. That's extremely important.
And why do you think progress has not been very fast or somewhat slow? In the case of Latino, Latinx media scholars. I mean, in the US, the population is close to 19%, it's 18 and a half or more. But clearly it's not 18.5% of positions in the field, let alone positions with significant decision-making authority, although yourself, Mari Castañeda at UMass, Hector Amaya at USC, now we're seeing a wave of before Anharad Valdivia at UIUC, but still, I mean, it's a small minority. Why do you think there is this disjuncture? And in particular, the pace of change has been quite slow.
Because I think when universities think about diversity, they don't think about Latinos. They don't think about Latinos. The US racial dynamics is black and white. And that's still the case, is black and white. And that's how diversity is defined. So when administrators who don't know anything about that, or oh my gosh, we need to focus on diversity. When they think about diversity, they only think about African Americans, okay? Which is perfectly good, wonderful, but there are other diversities. I can tell you, at least here in Michigan, I have been supported by many African American colleagues. They are the ones who are helping me. They were the ones who helped me, and they are still helping me, okay? But that is what is happening. It's very narrow. It's a very narrow definition of diversity. And as long as you keep the black and white dynamic without considering that it's more, there is broader definition of diversity, then it's going to be very difficult to see a lot of change.
Okay. Now, switching to your scholarly output, you've been very prolific, and you have a great sense for projects. I don't know how to put it. I mean, a great, like the book you're working on now, or the most recent books, I mean, they will really go after very important topics in ways that are very persuasive. How do you choose a topic? How's the process for you?
So thank you for saying that, because I remember when I talked to a colleague, one of my mentors at Texas, we were having a drink at SCMS, and I shared my second project, not this one, when I was working on the Cuba project. And he said, I don't think that's going to be a good project because no one cares about that. And I said, well, I have like a bunch of research on, so that's going to be the project. And indeed, it was, it has been good. I don't care if people care or not. One thing that happens, I don't care. Right now, people's, the aim is, digital is the most important thing. The jobs are digital, and that's where the future is in media studies. I'm not doing that. I like to discover things. I have selected topics that I'm passionate about, that I want to show something that was part of a past that people don't know, and I want to share it. Has that affected my opportunities in jobs? Most likely. Let me be clear, not in American culture, but in media studies. For example, my first book, someone told me that this is not a media studies book, this is an American culture book. And I said, okay. My second book, I said, okay, this has to be a media studies, so I'm going to be media studies television in the front. Okay, so it was a media studies. It's also Latin American studies, Caribbean studies, but it's also media studies. This one is going to be a Latino studies because it's the US, but also, connected to Latin America. I just like to discover things that people don't know about. The people in the industry know. That's what I like. And I select topics that I'm passionate about. I cannot select a topic because it's marketable. I know that for young people right now, that's very difficult. They need a job, and they know that there is, a media historian. I haven't seen one job for media historians. Even one. So they have to protect themselves, but then they can do other things. But in my case, I'm protecting, I'm fine. I say, you know what, I'm going to do what I'm passionate about. And if people read it, good. If, okay. But that's the way I see the projects. Something, I don't think about marketability, but something that for me is important.
Okay. And one aspect, you mentioned this, and I'm glad you did, because I was going to ask it, but it's more organic. Like this one aspect that is fascinating about your research is that you blend, or at least you're not necessarily blend, but your work explores in different ways intersections of Latino USA with Latin American dynamics. Mm-hmm. Which is something that it's not as common. I mean, most scholars either focus on Latin American issues or Latino USA. How has that experience been for you, in the sense of, interlocutors within and across the two communities? How has that come about?
So I think the Latin Americanists and the Latino people, Latino studies, especially connection with media, it's impossible, especially if you're focusing on Spanish language media, it's impossible to disconnect it from Latin America. Impossible. And it will be impossible. That's not going to change. There is an interconnection there. So the field itself gives me that connection. I think some in media studies, I think they don't know about that connection. I think they, if they look for a Latino media, so I might not be, they have to be, here in Michigan, they were broad enough to say, okay, yes, she does Latino media, but she also does the other things, so because they are interconnected, but that is not very common. So what I'm very welcome in American studies, faculty, all of them understand, the transnational, the flows, etc. Media studies has been more difficult to actually, they see like Latino studies. So you're going to focus on this and nothing else. And they don't understand that it's more broad. In English language, if you're focusing on Latino media, English language Latino media, then yes, of course, it's US centric. And in some way, if you connected with African American and other minority groups, like the relationship, etc. But if you're dealing with Spanish language media, which is an extremely powerful, still today, industry, you need to connect with Latin America.
Right, because there are 60 million Spanish speakers in the US, 40 million for whom Spanish is the dominant language.
Correct.
Right. But why do you think it has been more difficult for media studies than for American studies? American studies, one would think, well, English is the default language, so they might have more problems versus media studies, which does not have a language, a default language, or should not at least. Why do you think there is that difference?
I think, well, keep in mind, like media studies sometimes can be very narrow. Even with the way they engage with theories, for example, is media communication, nothing else. Like I remember for the second book, I used other theories from anthropology. I said, you know what, this is what fits, this is what I'm doing. So there is this narrowness in terms of who are they talking to and who are engaging with. They are not looking outside media or outside communication to see how, the cultural aspect that has been studied in other disciplines. That's a discipline itself. I don't know why it's so narrow. I can tell you many of the excellent books that I have seen by media scholars have come from anthropologists because they actually engage with media studies, literature, this broad sense. That sadly is not happening that much in media and communication. So it's the field itself that you recite the people who are around you, but you don't go beyond that little niche, and that you don't see that in other disciplines.
But those disciplines are also disciplines. So why do you think, in a sense, media and communication studies have become a little bit more insular than other fields?
To tell you the truth, I don't have the answer for that. I don't know. And let me be clear, I think media studies is more broad because they live with cultural studies, and cultural studies is something that has impacted so many disciplines. Communication, when you're dealing with, people, you have the chance to actually go or culture to other disciplines. I think something like American culture is embraces everything, or Latin American studies is the same. It embraces, history, media, etc. So because of that, you can actually look for different influences or literatures or examples. I don't have the answer why communication is so focused on specific issues, and media also, although media, again, as I mentioned before, is a little more open because of the cultural studies framework that has been instrumental in media studies.
Okay, which then brings us naturally to the closing of today's dialogue. So then, if you had magical powers and could be granted one wish about how you'd like the field of media and the field of communication studies to change, or one of them, what would you wish for?
I wish that we, and I said we, people who deals with Latino studies, African American and media studies, Asian American and media studies, gender and sexuality media studies, we are part of the field, but we are seen as separate. You know what I mean? It's not, so for example, if you teach an introduction to film, television, and media, you include literature. The canon needs to change. It cannot be ghettoized. It needs to be incorporated. So if I had a magical thinking, it's like, okay, if you teach a television studies class, history of television, you are going to include, I don't know, I'm gonna say I wrote it because I wrote it and I'm familiar and I love that show, Que Pasa USA, which is a PBS show. Okay, that's television. That's television history that deals with a community, or Chico on Demand, or so that not because you're dealing with Latinos. No, it's because it's part of the history of the field. So that's, and it's the same with movies, why, good Orson Welles. Can you include other films? Does it have to be always Orson Welles? So it's incorporation of different materials and different literatures that actually prove that this is not part of only one little circle that is part of Latino studies, but it's part of the bigger circle that is that's media studies.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Yeidy. This has been a super illuminating conversation. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you to all the listeners for staying with us to the end. And I invite you to tune in to the next episode of El Café Latinx.
Thank you.
El Café Latinx is a production of the Center for Latinx Digital Media in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern University. I am Pablo Boczkowski, your host, and I'm joined by executive producer Mona Matassi.